Some groups change laws, others change the culture. But it's really rare to find an organization that can say it built an entire social class. Well, that's exactly the story we're diving into today. It's about a group that sprang from the chaos of war and went on to become one of the most powerful and, yeah, one of the most controversial forces in all of American history. We're talking about the American Legion. So, the big question is, how on earth did they pull it off? How did this group of soldiers, sailors, and Marines manage to draft one of the most game-changing laws of the 20th century, while, at the same time, getting involved in some pretty violent vigilantism? It's a really complex story, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack. Okay, so to really get the Legion, you've got to understand where it came from. And its birthplace, it wasn't some polished, pristine government hall. No way. It was post-World War I Europe. I mean, think about it. A world that was completely shattered and trying to piece itself back together. You had millions of American soldiers who were suddenly, well, without a war to fight. They were just trying to figure out, what do we do now? And right out of that massive uncertainty, this new kind of veterans group didn't just, form quietly. It absolutely exploded into existence. I mean, the way the Legion came together was a total whirlwind. It all kicks off in March of 1919 with some soldiers meeting up in Paris. Then, just 2 months later, boom, they're holding a caucus in St. Louis with more than 1,000 people. The energy was just electric, but also totally chaotic. One historian actually called it a melee, where disorder reigned supreme. And yet, somehow, by September, they had an official charter from the U.S. Congress. It was just an unbelievably fast rise to power. And right from that chaotic beginning, they came out with this incredibly powerful statement of purpose. I mean, the preamble to their Constitution, this wasn't just some fluffy stuff about veteran buddies. No, this was a nation-building document. It laid out a really clear, really forceful ideology right from day one. So at the very core of that ideology was this idea they called 100% Americanism. Now, you got to remember, this is happening right after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, so there's a lot of fear in the air. This phrase became the Legion's big rallying cry, and what it meant was absolute, total loyalty to America, and a really fierce opposition to any other idea, especially things like communism or radical labor movements that they saw as a threat. And that powerful ideology, you combine that with a huge, and I mean huge, membership. Well, pretty soon the Legion had a kind of influence that no other private group in the country could even touch. Just to give you a sense of scale, by 1946, right after World War II, their membership had ballooned to a staggering 3.3 million veterans. This wasn't just a club, it was more like a grassroots army with a presence in pretty much every single town in America. And here's where their strategy got really smart. They were officially non-partisan. So by not endorsing any political candidates, they forced politicians from both sides of the aisle to come to them and compete for their support. And that, right there, gave them immense power in Washington. It made them one of the most powerful and effective lobbies in the entire country. But this power, it had a really hard edge to it. From their very first big meeting in St. Louis, the Legion's idea of patriotism meant going after their ideological enemies, and going after them hard. In fact, one of their very first resolutions called for immediately deporting every single Bolshevik and every member of the Radical Labor Union, the industrial workers of the world. You might know them as the Wobbly. And it didn't stay as just talk for long. That rhetoric turned into horrifying violence, and with shocking speed. Get this, on the very first anniversary of the end of World War I, a parade in a town called Centralia, Washington, turned into this deadly confrontation, and it really exposed the dark side of that 100% Americanism. And what happened there was just gruesome. A firefight broke out between Legionnaires who were marching in the parade and members of the IWW. 4 of the Legionnaires were killed. So an IWW member who was also a veteran himself, Wesley Everest, he gets arrested. But that night, a mob breaks into the jail, they drag Everest out, they castrate him, and then they lynch him from a bridge. And nobody was ever charged for his murder. It was just a truly chilling act of vigilante justice. So for decades, the Legion's conservative, really anti-radical voice was basically the only one you heard when it came to veterans issues. It totally dominated the conversation. But after the next World War, a whole new generation of soldiers came home, and they wanted something different. And that desire for something different, it led to the creation of a new group, the American Veterans Committee, or the AVC. It was set up specifically to be a liberal alternative to the Legion. It started attracting veterans who felt that their duty didn't just end on the battlefield. It meant fighting for social justice right here at home. And man, the contrast between these two groups couldn't be more stark. Okay, so the Legion's motto was for God and country. The AVC's motto, citizens first, veterans second. While the Legion was all about that 100% Americanism, the AVC was focused on things like civil rights and international peace. And this is a really big one. While a lot of Legion posts were segregated, the AVC offered full membership to women and people of color right from the very beginning. And the AVC took off. It grew super fast, hitting 100,000 members by 1947. But its rise got cut short, thanks to the Second Red Scare. As the pressure mounted, the AVC actually purged communists from its own ranks. It was a really controversial move, and that, plus the whole political climate, caused their membership to just plummet, down 80% in a single year. In the end, it was the Legion's vision of Americanism that won the day. But here's the thing. While the Legion was fighting all these ideological battles, they were also quietly working on what would become their single greatest, most lasting contribution to American life. I'm talking about the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known to all of us as the GI Bill. And this thing was absolutely revolutionary. It was like a massive piece of social engineering. It gave veterans money for college, it offered them low-cost mortgages to buy their own homes, and even gave them low-interest loans to start a business. It was literally the blueprint for the modern American middle class. And here's the crucial point. This piece of world-changing legislation, it didn't come from the White House. It didn't come from some fancy think tank. The original draft was written word for word by the American Legion. And for them, you see, this wasn't just about giving soldiers a pat on the back. It was a strategic move. It was a way to create a stable, educated, property-owning class of veterans, which they saw as the ultimate defense against all that radicalism and social unrest they were so afraid of. And so you have this dual legacy, this really progressive social policy on one hand, and these pretty reactionary politics on the other. And that mix would really define the Legion for the rest of the century. Yeah, the Legion never really softened that hardline stance. They became huge supporters of Senator Joe McCarthy and his anti-communist crusades. And for more than 40 years at their national conventions, they consistently passed resolutions branding the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, an un-American organization. So in the end, the Legion's legacy is just full of these deep contradictions. It's still a really powerful force for veterans' benefits, no doubt about it. The GI Bill created opportunity on a scale that America had never seen before. And its rival, the AVC, even though it was much smaller, it left its own important mark on civil rights and international cooperation. But when you look at them together, their story shows that veterans groups, well, they've never just been about parades and benefits. For the better part of a century, they were right at the heart of the fight to define what America itself was supposed to be. Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question. For generations, you had these powerful, highly organized groups of veterans who played this huge role in shaping our national identity, in deciding what patriotism even looked like. So, in the more fractured, more diverse America we live in now, who holds that power today? If anyone.